We left off with all of the positive things that Napoleon did for the citizens of France. He gave them roads, infrastructure, laws, a code of law, a banking system, all sorts of wonderful things. And he decides that he needs a title. He had been first consul, and he thought that that title didn't reflect his power. So he decides he wants to be emperor. And on Christmas Day, 1804, Napoleon will be crowned emperor. And he decides, and as has happened for centuries, when a king is selected or coronated, they like to have someone perform the ceremony who is legitimate, that makes it seem that, yes, this is truly the king or the emperor or whoever the ruler is. So Napoleon decides that he would like to get that legitimacy by inviting the Pope. Remember, in 1801, he restored the Catholic Church to France. So it's okay to be Catholic, sort of the symbol of we're bringing back the church. So he says, we're going to go to Notre Dame. It's no longer the Temple of Reason. It's back to being a church. He says, Pope, you can come all the way from Rome. It's winter. Take you a couple weeks to get here. That's fine. But I want you to be the one to crown me emperor. So at that moment, he's in Notre Dame. He's got all these fancy robes on. The Pope is about to crown him. And Napoleon reaches up and grabs the crown himself. He places the crown on his own head and is symbolizing that no one is superior to Napoleon, even the church, even the Pope, that Napoleon is superior. He is the one in charge. And then Napoleon crowns his wife. So this is a close-up of one of that famous image when he was about to crown his wife. If you look at the bishops and the church members in the background, they do not look pleased. They still cannot quite believe what has just happened. And again, not only did it happen, but this painting is part of the imagery. What he wants you to think happened. This is the large scale. It's a huge painting, again, by Jacques-Louis David, same painter who did the tennis court oath, same one who made the sketch of Marie Antoinette on the way to the guillotine. You can see the Pope sort of in the right-hand third of the painting, sitting down, not looking pleased. You have this very well-dressed court. It almost looks like there is a light from God coming down onto Napoleon, which definitely is perception, not fact. This was in Notre Dame, which is notoriously a very dark cathedral. Also, since it had been disused, the church, it was not maintained. The finishes were bad, it was crumbling, and so Napoleon had to have all of these tapestries installed. But the image, this is the image we remember, not, the darkness of it or the people who were or weren't there. So he's now emperor. He is an absolute leader. He has crowned himself. His crown isn't like a normal crown like we would think of. It's a golden laurel wreath, the same type of crown that the emperors of ancient Rome used. Again, he is referencing back to ancient Rome. He's trying to sort of restore in many ways the glory of that type of empire. But the question I have is, how different is this? I mean, it's pretty similar to the absolute leader they had just, rid the country of a few years before. Sure, the color's different. One red, one blue. One gold, one silver. But beyond that, Napoleon has come full circle. He supported the revolution. He wanted to be all about people's rights and the citizens. And now he got a little bit of power, and he wants more. This is what happens. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. One thing that Napoleon is going to do to get more territories, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do it through battle. That's the most popular. It's probably the easiest. Another is annexation. To annex something means you control it, but indirectly. These territories will have some degree of independence, of freedom, but at the end of the day, their ruler will be someone who has been approved by Napoleon. So we have win through battle and say, okay, you are part of France. We have made you part of our country. There's annexation. You're next door. We conquered you, but you still get to be independent. Just at the end of the day, you report to us. And then the other level is just friends. That Napoleon sort of wants to end some of the wars, create friendships and build alliances with a lot of these countries in France, or around Europe, With especially the territories that he has annexed, Napoleon is going to put his relatives in positions of power. So he becomes friends and eventually annexes Spain. His brother becomes the king of Spain. He annexes parts of Italy. He puts his cousin in as the king of Italy so that he can make sure that these sort of independent territories, at the end of the day, answer back to him. One country that's not included in any of this is Great Britain. They are still separate. They still hate France. And there's, one reason that they're not part of the empire is geographically they are separate. So Britain is able to never succumb to Napoleon's power. He gets pretty much all of the continent of Europe, but he still wants Great Britain. And Great Britain looks down at what's happening on the continent, and they're a little freaked out that this one guy, this one country, has that much power. And because Napoleon has so much power, because Napoleon has taken so much power, because he has instilled his family members in positions of power, this actually will lead to more nationalism across Europe. Countries saying, we want to be Italian, or we want to be German, or we want to be Swiss. We don't want to follow the rules of another country, of someone who's not like our people. Because, I love these political cartoons. Here he is. Napoleon is Versailles in the middle, or actually Fontainebleau. On the right is Russia. On the left is Spain. And he is trying to extend his empire, and he's trying to reach on stilts, but he is extending too far. He will eventually lose power, and that is the orb and scepter that look like they're falling, symbols of imperial power. He will stretch too far. His eyes will be too big for his stomach. That process begins just a year after he becomes emperor at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. This is against Great Britain specifically. Part of why Napoleon wants to beat Britain is because of their navy. Britain's navy is still the best. Napoleon is trying to establish that he is the best, so he feels the need to try and defeat Great Britain again. He tried in Egypt in the 1790s. He's going to try again. In this case, it specifically happens because the British were trying to prevent French merchant ships from reaching France. They're trying to disable Napoleon's economic power. They end up getting into a fight over it, and it is the French Navy versus the British Navy. The British ships are commanded by Lord Admiral Horatio Nelson. And just like in Egypt, Nelson whoops Napoleon again. This is off the southern coast of Spain, because the French ships were trying to get into the Mediterranean to the port of Marseille. Lord Nelson is actually killed as a result of this battle, but he becomes really one of the biggest heroes. He was a hero in Egypt, and because of this major battle, Nelson will become a hero because, as a result, Napoleon realizes he cannot defeat the British Navy, that nobody can defeat the British Navy. He gives up on his dream of controlling all of Europe. He'll just have to deal with having the continent. So because this is such an important battle in British culture, Trafalgar Square was named after the Battle of Trafalgar. It's one of the biggest squares in all of London. That is Nelson's column, Lord Nelson standing at the top. He has his sword in his left hand. There's nothing in his right hand because he doesn't have a right arm. In years earlier, he lost his right arm in battle. Even with one arm, he still is able to defeat Napoleon. And it was a fierce battle. If you see the upper left, the French ship, and then there is HMS Victory, the British ship that Nelson commanded. It wasn't completely equal. There was some give and take, but the end result is that Britain is superior. And this kills Napoleon. He hates it. This is where the idea of his pride comes in. It demonstrates that he's a loser, so he needs to do something else to repair his reputation. Again, here's a look at that map. The dark blue territories that are directly controlled by France. They are France. The medium blue, territories that have been annexed, controlled indirectly. They have freedom, but at the end of the day, the answer to France. And then the lighter blue are allies, and eventually Russia will be added to that as well. The problem with all this, with all of Napoleon's power, is that the people around Europe, they don't like it. As a way to retaliate against Britain, Napoleon decides to blockade all of the continent to prevent all British merchant ships from reaching ports in Europe, from being able to trade with European countries. Now, I understand why he does this. He can't defeat them militarily. He'll try to hurt their economy. It's called the Continental System because Napoleon is trying to cut off the continent of Europe from Great Britain. The problem is, the continent of Europe liked trading with Britain. Even the countries that Napoleon controls, even these annexed countries, the people say, wait a minute, we really like the products that we buy from Britain. They're an important part of our economy. So this completely backfires. Even his brothers and his cousin and all these family members say, the people are unhappy. That wasn't a good idea, Napoleon. As a result, there is more nationalism. More people are unhappy with what Napoleon had done. He was hoping that they would turn towards French products and that would help his economy in addition to hurting Britain. But it just doesn't happen. Portugal is one country that wasn't a part of Napoleon's empire. It still is on the continent. It's on the very, very edge, very eastern edge. Portugal never becomes part of Napoleon's empire. It's on the very western edge of the continent. They were able to hold out against the continental system, and this is again a blow to Napoleon's ego. He must control. He feels this need to control Europe. So he decides to invade Portugal. He will force them into submission, marches through Spain, gets Spanish troops, and ends up fighting the Portuguese and also a little bit the Great British, because the British see Portugal as the example of someone who is succeeding, who is holding out against Napoleon. So it's Spanish troops versus Portuguese troops, but we would call this a proxy war. It's really about Britain fighting France. This is called the Peninsular War because it's on the Iberian Peninsula, and you'd think the French army is huge. They're the best army in Europe at the time, but because of the support of the British and this tactic called guerrilla warfare, the Peninsular War actually goes on for about 6 years. Now, guerrilla warfare is different than what was considered standard warfare of the time. At the time, it would have been normal to line up your army on one side of the field, and your enemy lines up on the other, and you march towards each other and shoot. That's the simplified version. Guerrilla warfare is often used by rebel groups, and in this case, by the natives in Portugal. You are using the territory to your advantage, whether that means you hiding behind a hill, attacking, and then running away. It might be seen as cowardly, but it's effective. So the natives of Portugal are using this guerrilla warfare because they know the terrain. This means that Napoleon is engaged in another war for a chunk of time, that he must devote troops and resources and funds and time and energy, that, this is a drain on the other places that he must rule. So his empire starts falling apart. He starts losing friends. In 1809, Austria says, we're not benefiting from this relationship. It's not me, it's you. And so Austria says, we are no longer friends. We do not have an agreement anymore. Napoleon is put off by this. He can't believe that someone would want to leave this agreement. But then it gets worse when Russia leaves the continental system. Does not want to suffer any longer under this economic system that Napoleon creates. And now Napoleon is really hurt. He must find some way to repair his reputation. So his grand idea is to invade Russia, because that's what everyone should do when they're upset with Russia. So in 1812, the summer of 1812, Napoleon leaves France with over 420,000 soldiers. I think the full number is about 422,000. And he is going to, through his military strength, win back Russia. Now, the three things that we know about Russia, that we have studied, that we've talked about, are that Russia is large, cold, and full of Russians. This is why it's a bad idea to invade Russia. So Bad Decision Dinosaur thinks this is great.